enough credit, etc. They lost 2 games. They lost at Tech. They lost at Cincinnati by 8 and also 10. Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio, joins us on 365 Sports. Hey, man, appreciate your time. We were discussing in this day and age of the transfer portal, is it more likely to see an Arizona State type run? And would it be in the SEC? Will we ever see something like that, or was this just maybe the exception and a one-off? I don't know.
I mean, look, I think what we've seen in this conference is a lot of parity, and so in some ways, while Arizona State was extremely hard to predict because everybody thought they'd finish at the bottom of the league, and from a personnel standpoint, there was just so many unknowns. We're also not unused to seeing this. I mean, go back and look a couple of years ago, an Oklahoma State team that nobody predicted, to finish at the top of the league ended up playing for a Big 12 championship. And I mean, it's become commonplace, go back even years before that, where we see teams that shouldn't be there competing towards the top of the conference. And I mean, even BYU last year, right? I mean, Arizona State gets sort of all the credit because they won it. But I mean, look, BYU had a resume where they probably should have been considered greater than they were for the college football playoff. So, I mean, BYU and Arizona State were 2 teams that nobody really predicted last year that came out of nowhere to have the seasons they ended up having. And, and Arizona State stands out. So, my vantage point of this, guys, is that this is what we're going to see until proven incorrect. We have to expect that every year there's going to be pretty significant turnover and parity in this league. And look, I mean, at this point, I'm trying to figure out who that team is going to be this upcoming season, because I think we know who will be at the top, and we can always go back on it'll be, Texas Tech and Baylor and Iowa State and Arizona State and probably BYU. Like, those are the teams in the preseason that should be towards the tops. Many of the teams that finished at the top of the standings. But again, if any other season has been any indication, look at where the top 5 was in the preseason last year versus where the top 5 finished. And, will it be as crazy as it was last season? Probably not. But at the same time, this is a league of parity. Until proven otherwise, it's going to remain a league of parity.
Ari, Texas Tech is, I guess you could give them the trophy for the off-season champs, right? I think in the Big 12 and maybe in college football, depending on what category you're talking about. But who beyond them has had the most interesting offseason up to this point in your estimation when it comes to the league and the changes made or decisions made?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think Arizona State, because they didn't have to add a ton, but where they did. I mean, they basically return Arizona State 11 of the 12 starters, and then they bring in Army's running back to kind of take the place of Cam Scadaboo. And I think, that'll be a different look. I'm really intrigued by BYU. I mean, because they lost a decent amount, but then also added a ton, including, Utah transfer Keanu Tanavasa. And they have a ton of guys that they got defense. They're going to play into how good that defense is going to be. K-State has added along their offensive line. And of late too, they added 2, spring portal guys along the offensive line, including a 6'5", 326-pound tackle from Penn State who played, JB Nelson, who played in 3 playoff games last year. So just kind of going down. I mean, West Virginia and UCF with 2 new coaches that have been there before, but those are intriguing. How about, Cincinnati added a late addition to the transfer portal at left tackle, and, Chris Hummer, our buddy from 24/7 Sports, had it as the number 1 spring, spring transfer portal edition, because you just don't see left tackles like that available in the portal. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. How about, I'm just going through my head now, Connor Wegman at Houston at the quarterback position. I think that was a huge addition. And Houston, by the way, has the number 1 quarterback in the state of Texas, a 5-star coming out next year. Out of the Houston area. I think he's out of Katy, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I mean, I look up and down. I think there's a ton of intriguing additions. I haven't even touched on Baylor, and a team that was as good as any team in college football last year when the season ended. And what have they done to kind of, solidify things around Sawyer Robertson, especially up front? So I think there's a lot to be intrigued by in this conference. This is a conference that, just saw a guy in AJ Halsey go out the door to go to LSU. So sometimes you're going to lose some of your top flight players in Halsey leaving Houston to go to LSU. But for the most part, this is a league that's going to add talent from other conferences, add talent from lesser levels.
Does it also intrigue you this year because the quarterback the depth of the quarterbacks and how good they not all, but I mean, even Wigman at Houston gets a chance to do something there. And some of the guys coming back that were good last year, can they be as good this year with Retzlaff, or Levitt? Are they going to take the next step, or was that just a year? The year before that, Levitt was at Arizona State, they had 8 touchdown passes, 14 picks. He had 24 and 6, a massive difference. Can they get that kind of play again from those same guys?
Yeah, I mean, I believe so. I mean, going back to your question, Smokey. So we talked about this on our show the other day, and basically, like, if you looked at the accumulation of quarterback talent in this conference, is the SEC or the Big Ten any better? I'd argue that the closest second is the Big Ten, and even then, I mean, you're looking at a bunch of newcomers. I mean, Drew Aller is back. But beyond that, like, you got a bunch of young players at Michigan, at Ohio State, young quarterbacks that are stepping into big roles. UCLA, he's Nico Iamaleava, who, we know about all the offseason drama with him. So, like, the Big Ten has a lot of talent, but it's young and inexperienced talent. You look at the SEC and, like, you lose a Jalen Milroe. Now Garrett Nussmeier's back at top so that's a, top flight guy. DJ Lagway at Florida is another guy. But, like, I'm just top to bottom, the Big 12 has the best accumulation of quarterbacks in the nation. And this is not something we've seen in, I can remember. I mean, last year going into the season, I would argue that the Big 12 had the best running back grouping of any of the conferences, but not quarterback. And yeah, I mean, you look at Levitt, you look at Robertson and how he finished up the season last year. And again, hopefully it's not all on him like it appeared to be at points last year, whether it be running or throwing the football. And I think guys emerged. But Baron Morton is in line to have a big year at Texas Tech. They think they finally have an offensive line to help and, a defense that could stop some people. Rocco Becht is kind of under the radar as a guy that helped to lead Iowa State, to a Big 12 championship appearance. And, he's only getting better and improving. Jalen Daniels is far down this list and is a guy that was, Heisman Trophy hopeful a few years back. And so now he's back with a guy that he's comfortable with, this offensive coordinator, and Jim Zebrowski. There's plenty I'm probably leaving out. Connor Wegman's a guy that comes in with a ton of upside. Remember, like, Houston was a major surprise story last year. I love Devin Dampier at Utah, maybe because you expect that Utah will still have a good defense. Dampier comes in with his offensive coordinator. And so now he's, got a quarterback that understands his system. So that'll be a really intriguing. Noah Fafita's a guy that was, thought of as one of the best quarterbacks in the conference coming into the season last year. And, he took a step back, but does he get back to where he was a couple of years ago? I'm a big fan of Hoss Haney, who transferred from TCU as a big recruit now to Oklahoma State. Now, I'm not sure that he'll start, but I think he's probably their best option at starting. So, and then Caden Salter or Juju Lewis at Colorado. Salter is a guy that's experienced, that maybe looking at kind of being a one-year bridge quarterback for Colorado. And, and then Juju Lewis is a guy that is a true freshman, that is a 5-star, that high expectations. Brennan Sorsby, I think, was really under the radar last year, had a really good start to the season and then really petered off. I don't know if he had an injury or something happened, because he was running the ball a lot more than he was throwing in the second half of the season. So yeah, I mean, when I look up and down this conference is loaded with quarterback talent and probably the best in the country. And that's not something that we've seen ever. I didn't mention Retzlaff. I didn't mention Avery Johnson, who is a 5-star, who has a lot of expectations. And yeah, I mean, has the potential for Sam Levitt to take another step and become a top 10 pick. So ultimately, I think this conference has everything in terms of dual threat guys, top 10 pick potential guys, and then young players looking to emerge.
Texas Tech is all in. Are you all in on Texas Tech?
It's hard not to be, right? Because this part of the year, what are you looking at? You're looking at, like, raw talent and what we know. So, I mean, their biggest deficiencies of the last few years is defense, and particularly on their offensive and defensive lines. Well, they poured a bunch of money into that. I mean, and their offensive line, they've got 6 guys that could start for them that have already started a handful of games over 1 or 2 seasons on an offensive line. So, like, that's huge, right? And then defensive line, I mean, they had a great defensive line portal before the spring entry, and then they added David Bailey, who's arguably the best defensive lineman that they signed from Stanford, who's a big-time pass rusher. Lee Hunter is an interior guy that they signed from UCF. So Skylar Gale Howard's another guy that they signed from the portal that should be a monster. So yeah, I mean, it's hard not to. Now, in watching Baron Morton last year, I thought that he at times looked to be kind of a system quarterback. I thought Zach Kitley put him in situations to where he was making easy throws on easy reads that helped him out in situations. And when the ball was put in his hands, he didn't really make plays to help them win games a ton. Now, again, I think their offensive line struggled. I think their defense was a big issue. So you're trying to make up for a lot when you're a quarterback under those circumstances.
And also injured, yeah.
Yeah, right. And that too, right? The shoulder injury. But he did start 12 games, which was the number one thing that Texas Tech needed coming into the season. They'd not had a quarterback start every game for them in a season since Pat Mahomes did it. So, they at least got that monkey off their back, despite Morton still suffering some injuries last year, probably due to their offensive line. So, I mean, I think, when he's got to do a lot less this year, that should help. Now, with that being said, like, they brought in Sheil Wood from Houston, who's the new defensive coordinator, who I love. I think that's a great hire. But then you lose Kitley, and so you bring in another, Mac Leftwich steps in as offensive coordinator, which that could be good. But like, we know they've upgraded a defensive coordinator. We don't know where they are at offensive coordinator in terms of an upgrade, because they lost their guy because their guy was really good, who's now the head coach at Florida Atlantic. So, yes, to me, they're with a handful of teams that I'm picking preseason to be the top of the conference. But I think like expectations, and I'm sure expectations were like this in Waco, like for Tech, they've got to play for a Big 12 championship, I think, at a minimum. Now, there's obviously the context of what happens over the course of the season. Does Morton get hurt? They've got Will Hammond behind him, who's a big-time recruit out of Austin area, but he's still young and still learning. So, I mean, how much leeway do they get if Morton gets hurt? Like, there's obviously important context. You can't just say before the season, like, they've got to do this without adding some context. But, like, yeah, I think most fans, and I'd imagine most fans of Waco feel the same way. Like, you got to get to the Big 12 championship game this year.
Which team, if they don't down to the last weekend or two, aren't in the mix, will be the big disappointment? Is there like, you don't know, because we just discussed, that's why we talk about the Big 12. But which one? Is it K-State? Is it Tech? That if they're not in the last weekend or two, then they have to feel like, man, are we going to get back there? Or Tech would like just to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tech, I think K-State, because it would mean that maybe they didn't have the season they thought they would with Avery Johnson. But I go back to Arizona State. As I mentioned at the front end of this interview, like, this is a league of parity, and that's not good for the league. I think the league needs a team to emerge, to become top heavy. Arizona State could be one of those teams. We talked about this after TCU went to the national championship. You need to see some consistency at the top of the conference, because, for a while, this conference was judged by Texas and OU, and then how teams performed against Texas and OU. Well, without that litmus test, who's that team? Right. So, and perception matters here, guys. Like, BYU did not get in based on perception. They weren't even part of the conversation. And when you go look at it, like, that's ridiculous. They should have been part of the conversation based on what they did, but there's just no big time brand that's won consistently that you could measure yourself against. Fair, unfair, whatever. Like, that's the reality of the situation. BYU should have been much more a part of the playoff conversation than they actually were, based on the resume, and they weren't because of the state of the Big 12. So the Big 12 desperately needs consistency at the top. Arizona State can show that. They won, obviously, last year, went toe-to-toe with Texas in a playoff game. They've got, really good recruiting. Do they have 2 top 10 picks and Tyson and Sam Levitt? Like, I think these are all things that, like, would go a long way into create, some teams that are top heavy in this league, for which the rest of the league can judge itself. But yeah, I mean, I go to Arizona State more so than anybody else from a disappointment standpoint, because somebody in this conference needs to emerge to become a consistent winner in it. And obviously Arizona State's the most recent version of that.
So, Ari, I was just curious on y'all's end, what was it like talking spring football? Does it feel different? Like, it certainly did on our end, because there's so much mystery about who's still on your roster, and there's like people trying to hide things now. And like, did that translate over to y'all's coverage as well, and talking to coaches and just kind of getting the vibe of like, there needs to be a fix, and until then, spring football just doesn't mean what it used to?
Yeah, I mean, nobody really even knows the rules of engagement, and like, can't. So, I mean, you've got some coaches that are gearing up for having to get to 105 on their roster. And that came from their administrators telling them, like, you're going to have this settlement's going to come down, and because of that, you're going to have 105 players in your roster. So you're like, I know at Oklahoma State, they're already starting to cut down their roster and cut players, and I'm sure at other places too. And now there's a delay here. And obviously the big story with the delay on the settlement is that they want to grandfather in the players that were already on campus with these teams that, so it makes the transition easier. So, I mean, you like, how difficult is that? You don't even know how many players are supposed to be in your roster. And by the way, the reason that schools want 105 as the limit is because they want to limit the amount of money that they're spending to have players on the roster. So, like, I'm sure with some schools, they're going to say, like, you're still going to cut players to get us down to 105. Some have already done it, and they're down to 105. Others are going to be at 130 or 135. So, like, yeah, this is a really difficult time in terms of who's available, who's not. There were also 4,900 players via Chris Summer at 24/7 Sports that entered either the fall or spring portal. That's 4,900 FBS players. So sometimes you look at that and be like, oh, those are some FCS guys or whatever. FBS players, 4,900 of them. So, yeah, I mean, it's only getting more and more muddled in terms of having these spring conversations because everybody's talking about how we can improve still, right? Like, so you could, like, what was the last time? I mean, Smokey, like, just think about, like, ending spring practice being like, you know what? We'd still like to add offensive line. We'd still like, what? No, you're what?
Yeah. No,
What
yeah.
are you talking about? You can't add any more players. It's spring football's over. You're heading to fall now. You're a few months away from the season started.
Yeah, Dion, remember after they had that, whatever the game was that they played, in the press conference, he was asked, what do they need? We'll take 2 corners. We need a couple of dogs at wide receiver. He did everything but long snapper, which Texas signed one of those over the weekend. But it is nuts. I mean, the coaches in some cases complain because they don't know who's going to be on their roster.
Right.
And sometimes that's their own fault because they're trying to replace everybody.
Right. Totally.
Or
You're
some.
right.
Yeah.
No, you're totally right. And look, I mean, I love what Kenny Dillingham is doing at Arizona State. I mean, he is a very unique coach. I mean, I think to be that good and that young and not have an ego like Sark did when he was the coach at USC, or like Kiffin did when he was the head coach of the Raiders at his age. Like, he's the same age as those guys in those situations, but not an egomaniac. And I think, like, you just see the camaraderie amongst that team, just the way in which, that group sticks together. Like, there's a lot to like about the culture at Arizona State, and it's centered around Dillingham. Last year, the biggest reason for me why I thought they'd finish at the bottom of the conference was because they had like 60 new players. And you're thinking, like, no way that's a success. Man, if they go into next year adding 60 new players, like, how many more years before Dillingham is out? And the issue was they brought in 60 new guys because year one for Dillingham, all he did was spend time figuring out who wasn't going to be on his roster the next season. And so he flushed those guys out, Jaden Rashada being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now Rashada's at Sacramento State on his 5th school. You can't win with those guys. Like Nico Iamaleava, all the talent in the world. Is he going to be transferring out of UCLA after next season? Similarly to Rashada, it's just hard to win with those guys. So, going back to it, I think culture matters a ton, and how you are able to, include a culture in which guys want to stay and continue to be a part of it. You're not having to, play the portal every year. Like, that's a huge asset to teams that are, that don't have to have 20, 30 new players every year. Like we're looking at like UCF or like West Virginia do with their coaching turnover.
Yeah, coaching turnover has a lot to do with that too. Coaches come in, they basically tell players if they're going to be around or not,
Right.
and vice versa, looking for their own type of fit for what they do. Thanks, buddy. Good to see you. Thanks for your time. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.
You guys are the best. Thanks for asking.
Thank
And
you.
sorry I was late.